Q&As are coming.
I love Q&A.
Yep, let's do that.
I know there's a couple of curly ones there too, Mark.
Yep. So let's do it.
Let's go through it.
So, righto, Kouky,
Okay,
here we go.
mate.
So this is from at David Kerr, Davin Kerr. Thanks, mate. And his question is, why has inflation gone back up, and what's the outlook for inflation heading into 2026? Well, we've just sort of covered that.
We've covered that. Inflation, we and this is not, I'm not answering the question. We need to see the effect of these government administered charges wash through the data. We need to refocus on the unemployment. It's not because the economy is booming. Normally, and this is the thing about the inflation, if you just give me 30 seconds, normally when inflation kicks higher, the economy, consumer spending is booming. It's not at the moment. So that makes me think too that it is these administered prices that are driving it. So I would be reasonably confident that once we get through to the March quarter and the June quarter next year, some of these inflation numbers will be back into the 2-point-somethings, and we'll look back and think, gee, that was a funny spike back that we saw last year.
And I'm expecting exactly the same. And in fact, I'm expecting us to resume interest rate reductions from mid next year. By the way, but I read Warren's piece yesterday. He's saying rate increase December.
And he's not the Lone Ranger. Warren Hogan and a few others are talking genuinely about the prospect of rate hikes. Look, I never say never anymore, but I think it's still unlikely for all of the reasons that we've just spent the last 30, 40 minutes talking about, that there's still some pain in the economy and those inflation numbers might be misleading.
All right, well, let's talk about, see here what Craig Samet has said. How can the government realistically cut spending to keep pace with economic growth and interest rates?
Well, it can, because we come back to the inflation components that the government charges and the components of the employment market, which are government employees. They can cut spending. Spending is a share of GDP. I'll use pre-pandemic, because the pandemic, obviously, we had to spend a lot of money to keep the economy sort of growing, has gone up from about 24% of GDP was federal government spending. It's now about 27%, bouncing around 3 percentage points of GDP. When you consider our GDP is getting close to $3 trillion, 30% is $300 billion per annum. Now, I'm not saying he should cut $300 billion because the economy would keel over. However, and we're seeing this with the review of the public service that the Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher's talking about. We sort of saw Peter Dutton demonised when he was sort of saying, we've got to cut public servants. It's curious that Labor are now sort of saying, well, maybe we hired a few too many. We'll find out, maybe in the mid-year review, or certainly in the budget next year in May. The issue with government spending, I'm coming back to politics again, the harsh reality of our economy. If you're cutting spending, someone loses out, and they tend to be very noisy about it. So it might say, I'm going to cut spending on defence. Oh, the defence is, we need all these defence to sort of stop to, fund our submarines. Or I'm going to cut spending on education. Oh, hang on, we need our kids and
there's always someone who's going to be unhappy.
I'm going to cut spending on roads. Oh no, the roads are full of potholes. I'm going to cut. So cutting spending is really hard. Sometimes we've needed it done, and I'm just wondering whether in the next lead into the mid-year budget update in a couple of weeks, and more importantly the budget in May, we'll see a little bit of it coming through. Not tax hikes. So, and by the way, if they do cut spending enough, like if it's a chunk, not just a few $1 billion, if it's like a big enough amount, the Reserve Bank will say, oh, gee, government demand's coming off a bit. The private sector's got more room to grow. Oh, it's not quite strong enough. It will put downward pressure on interest rates.
Which is a good thing.
Which helps the private sector to grow.
Which I think is what Craig Samet sort of.
I think that's what. Yes, I think
trying to get to.
So, if a big cut in government spending, if we were to see that, wouldn't necessarily mean rate cuts, but it makes rate cuts more probable. Put it that way.
Right, Jake 221. He says, "What's the likelihood of a recession in the next 5 years if we continue on this current trajectory?" Well, that's like way too hard to answer. Likelihood. I mean, like that's a probability question,
and it won't be driven by policy mistake. It'll be like a pandemic or a war with Taiwan and China and the USA. And
sorry, Jaggy,
mate, it's a tough one. I'd like to think that if the early signs were coming through, we'd see massive interest rate cuts and they would be avoided.
Yeah, well, because that's the Reserve Bank's there for.
That's what they did in the global financial crisis.
Yeah, and by the way, the government can do a bit of fiscal policy.
And they can do a bit too, yes. Yeah.
What does Kook think? This is from Andrew. For Andrew, I think that's on X. Andrew says, does Kook think of all the memes about him? What does Kook think about all the memes about him? Does he find them funny? And how does he feel about becoming an internet celebrity?
On X. There are a few nasty ones, Mark.
X can get a bit that way.
Look, I like to give it, but people know who I am. I'm not anonymous. I look, some of them are quite funny, you know.
Yeah.
Some of them
they don't miss you, though.
Some of them are really funny. Some of them are really mean, and you know, I won't even mention their names because I do know who you are. I don't want to give you any publicity. But some of them are really, really nasty, and they talk about.
Mate, really why do you read them?
Really personal things. Oh, look, I just read them for fun.
Yeah.
Look, I like the banter, and if people sort of do a meme of me and, interest rates going down or up or whatever, Kook said this, they're funny. They're funny. They're great fun. But sometimes they just overstep the mark. I do read them, but, mate, I'm old enough and got thick skin, whatever. Go for it, team. Go for it.
And you've been involved in politics too.
I've given up giving anything back because it just inflames the situation. And other than people who are happy to reveal who they are, if you're like Fred 76932 and you're spewing out all these memes and hurling out abuse at me, I'll forget. But if you say that you're Mark Bouris, you say, "Oh, Kouky, you're wrong on rates," I'll say, "Mark, okay, let's have a conversation about it." Or if you're Jack Smith or whatever your name is, let me know who you are. I'll engage with you, and I'll engage with you happily. But don't hide behind the sort of
the veil of anonymity.
That's it, Mark. Thank you.
On YouTube 5, we've got Robin Ellison 3790.
Yep.
Why haven't wages kept up with house prices? Previously, the ratio was 3 to 4 times on a single yearly income. Now it's 10 to 12 times on an average income.
Yep.
Like the income to asset price.
Really good
ratio.
question. There are a few reasons. There has been over several decades. There has been a structural lowering in interest rates, so your borrowing capacity has gone up. Even as recently as 2000, so what's that, 25 years ago, mortgage rates were tending to be 7, 8, 9%, give or take. Now they're 4, 5, and 6. Allowing for the various cycles. So they've come low. So therefore, by definition, your borrowing capacity's gone up. People buying houses with that extra capacity, and so that's part of the reason why house prices have gone up. There has been some, and this is always difficult to quantify, foreign purchases of Australian dwellings, and they don't rely on Australian incomes to buy that lovely $5 million house in, Northbridge or wherever they happen to buy it. Whatever, it's not relevant to them. They've got the money. So the foreign investor purchase of dwellings has distorted our property market. Now, they've tried to crack down on that a little bit. Fair enough, I suppose. But their question now is that people on an average income are buying below average priced dwellings. So, back in the day, that question's a very good one. Someone on average income buys an average priced house. Fine. Now, if you're on an average income, you buy a house that's less below than average. So you buy a little 2-bedroom unit rather than a 3-bedroom little renovatable house, which you probably did 20 years ago. So there is a shift in the buying patterns, definitely. And will it ever go back? Look, I don't. Oh, gee, it'll take decades of flat house prices, so zero growth. I don't think we're going to have a house price crash ever, but it might take 10 years of house prices do nothing. So the $1 million house today is $1 million house in 10 years' time, and your wage might have gone up from 100 to 150,000 on that time, whatever. So affordability will improve. That's the only way it's going to happen.
It's interesting. The regulator of the banks came out recently, I think it was this week actually, and said that banks can no longer lend. Banks now must restrict to 20% of their total lending. Lending to borrowers where that borrower is borrowing more than,
I think it was 6 times.
6 times the debt being more than 6 times their income. So if my income's $100,000, I can't borrow, or the banks can't lend me more than 600,000.
Correct.
And or they can, but I've got to be in that group of 20%. So only 20% of my lending is allowed to be done like that.
Yes. And that is a tightening in lending policy. But by definition, you just...
And to some extent, that's sort of directed at trying to manage house prices.
It is, and it's trying to manage the debt issue, the household debt issue. It does allow people who've got an okay deposit, to buy a house. I want people to buy a house. I want home ownership to go up. I want young people to buy their first home. I want that to happen because home ownership is, your ticket to financial security.
But given that's the case,
but it's hard.
Yeah.
And so
people are going to buy cheaper houses.
Correct.
They have to.
And if you restrict lending at the top end, so people going above their heads and just say just say we do get some rate hikes. Oh my God, the consequences for people would be dramatic.
Well, I always wonder when like the regulator who talks to Treasury, who talks to the Reserve Bank, says this is going to happen. They're worried about rates going up, and that we don't want any sort of distortion or shock into the system.
And this is it's not quite as good as a rate hike, but it is a mini rate hike, if we can call it that, and targeted at housing. Because, and this is just if we can sort of finish here, the RBA doesn't want to hike rates because it will have consequences for business investment. Businesses borrow money to invest. Most of them do. They do want to perhaps lean against this house price going up as strongly as it was. So in theory, they'd want to be sort of seeing house prices a little bit less strong than they currently are. They don't want them to fall. So, but you can't target interest rates.
RBA can't.
Whereas the regulator can say, hey, banks don't lend to people with a six times income, more than 6 times income.
My point is, it looks like the RBA might be saying to Treasury, we can't do that, but why don't you consider this?
I think that's a very high probability.
Yeah, very much so. Well, Kouky, Merry Christmas to you, mate.
Merry Christmas, Mark.
And we'll see you again next year. And my gut feeling is, from you're saying too, I think we agreed, no rate reduction or no rate movement, I should say, in the next meeting, which is next week on the 8th or the 9th. I think it's the 9th. And
the 9th, the announcement.
But perhaps a change in language. Let's look for the language change. Let's look for what she says during her Q&A. And press conference, but really start getting prepared for something based on the data that comes at the end of January. Start being prepared for something to happen in February.
And Merry Christmas too. Agree with that. And a really good 2026. Let's just chillax, watch a bit of the cricket, enjoy your Christmas festivities and New Year celebrations, the fireworks. 26 is going to be a good one, I reckon.
You betcha, mate. Good on you, Kouky.
Thanks, Mark.